What's up, bros, and welcome to another Brograph tutorial. I'm Dave Koss, and today we are going to be learning how to make a logo look good. What does that mean? Well, I'll show you. First thing we're going to do is start with a logo that somebody made, a flat logo, and I'm going to show you kind of what not to do here. And first thing I'm going to do is open up the logo that somebody gave me. So let's say for this example that you are working on a logo for a client. They would usually give you something that's maybe usable, and what you need to do before you get started, and at some point I'm going to have some sort of tutorial on organization, you're going to put a graphics folder into your project and you're going to organize it, and I'm going to show you how to organize it so that you can kind of keep your files straight. You don't have to use this method exactly, but a lot of people just kind of throw files all over the place and it can really be confusing. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make my graphics folder for this project, and I'm going to put in these 8 folders. You don't have to worry about the last one. I just have that for when I'm doing video projects. Number 1, AE, that's for After Effects files. AI for Illustrator files, audio for any audio that accompanies the graphic. C4D, that's where your projects go. Inside of C4D, you've got the render folder for sequence files that you render out. You've got the text folder for any Cinema 4D textures. And over here we've got a Final Cut Pro folder in case we need to open that, or Premiere, and maybe tweak things like audio or cut things. Don't usually use it that often. PSD is for Photoshop files. Ref is for references, reference files. And render is where your final renders would go. So I'm going to go to my desktop, and in my desktop I've got Bohan logo. And this is the case where this would be something that somebody sent you and you need to recreate it. Well, luckily it's an Illustrator file and we don't have to trace it. So I'm going to put that in the Illustrator AI folder, and I'm going to open it. Now when you're working with Cinema 4D, you can't use the most recent AI files. You have to kind of downgrade. That may have changed recently, I don't know, but I've just kind of stuck with this because usually you have to take an Illustrator file and you have to turn it into Illustrator 8. So, still opening. Hold on a minute. Alright. Another thing you want to do when you get somebody's logo is you want to make sure that you have the right font. Now, right here, I've got your classic Gotham. And the only thing about this is, luckily I have Gotham. Most people would probably give you a file with a font that is not included with the project, and you'll end up having to trace it or find the font with whatthefont.com or something like that. Now when I'm working on logos like this, it's not really worth it for me to even take the text if I already have the font, because I can bring that text in Cinema 4D easier than just trying to save this out as an Illustrator file to extrude it. And not to mention I can use Brograph and stuff like that with text, and it's just easier to handle text if you just type it directly into Cinema. So I've got this here. First thing I'm going to do, I want to grab just this logo, and I will have this file as a sample for download so you can do this same tutorial with the same logo. We're not going to worry about what it says down here at the bottom. We're just going to copy this logo element. I'm going to make a new file and paste it, and now we're going to save as an Illustrator file, and we're going to go to our folder, and that graphics folder that we created, into the Illustrator folder, AI, and we're going to call this logo. Easy enough. Then it's going to ask us for these options, and we're going to tell it we want Illustrator 8 so that it's compatible with Cinema 4D. Other thing I'm going to do, just for reference, is I'm going to hit Shift Command 4, which lets you do a screen grab of anything you want. And I'm going to take a nice little picture of the logo for reference. Now we get to go into Cinema 4D. How about that? I'm going to start a new project that is outputting 1920 by 1080, 2997, and aliasing, anti-aliasing is going to be best. That's a good starting point. I'm going to save it. And I'm going to put it into the Cinema 4D folder. And I'm going to call it Logo. Alright. First thing I need to do is get that logo file. And I'm going to drag it into the Cinema 4D icon so that it just opens right up. There's my logo. Okay, so let's take a look. It looks like the center point's good. We don't have to change the pivot point. What we do want to do is take the points off of here around it. We don't need that. Everything here looks good. Got a nice looking spline. I'm going to move some of these around for a second and undo and just make sure we're good. A lot of times in your logo you'll get kind of a secondary spline beneath the existing spline, and that's going to screw up your extruding. But this one's good. This is a nice clean logo. It was designed well. It was designed by a friend of mine actually, so he did a good job. Alright, I'm going to copy the logo and I'm going to go back to my logo project, which is closed. For some reason when you import fresh like that logo, it closes the project you were on. Alright, now I'm going to paste this object into my project. There's nothing there, right? It's somewhere else. It's off screen, and I could go to it and start working from there, but I don't like doing that. I like my position for an object to be set to origin so that I have a nice uniform place to build. It just makes sense. All your new objects or new lights, all of that stuff will all appear in a similar place, and getting too far from origin without a reason just doesn't make much sense. It just gets complicated. Alright, so I've got the logo. I'm going to scale it up just a little bit here. And most people who were going to make a logo would do something like this. They would extrude it. They might put some color on it, which I'm not going to show you right now, but they would take and maybe put some Omni lights like this, another Omni light here, another Omni light in the bottom. It's way too much. They would light the crap out of it. They would put some color on it, call it a day, and they'd be like, oh, there's my 3D logo. It's great. Well, we're going to learn how to make this look pretty, because not only do we want it to look pretty, but we want it to look very animated, all the pieces to animate, all the text to animate, and we want it to feel like whoever is paying for this logo design is actually getting their money's worth. What a concept. So, I'm going to turn off those lights that I added. We will keep the extrude. Okay, so let's look at this object for a second. The first thing that I notice is that it looks a little segmented in these areas. If you'll notice, there's kind of some points right here. So I'm going to try and get rid of that by changing my angle on my spline to 0. Now if I render it again, you can see that it's really smoothed out these edges here, and that's something that's going to be important if you're getting very close to the logo in your animation. So go to your extrude object now and go to the caps tab, and then you're going to click both start and end with the control key down, because you want to manipulate both of these at the same time. It just saves you time. And then let go. You're going to hit command again. If you hold command before you do a selection like this, in this case fillet caps, it will do this for start and end, and you can see that it did it on both sides here. Now we want 3 steps. We're going to go with 3 steps here on both of these. but our radius is way too big. We're going to go with 2. Yeah, I like that. It's pretty good, I guess. That's a nice bevel. You know, you could choose to do it your own way. You could add less steps. You could add a smaller radius, a bigger radius. But I kind of like this. It's enough to catch the specular once we put in some lighting. So what's the next step? We have to align the Bohan Electrical name. What will we do for that? Well, we are going to do a plane. We're going to create a plane, and notice that it is created at origin. Move this. I keep hitting it. And we're going to go do a -Z orientation, and that is going to be perfect for us. Now, this is going to be our reference to the photo, the screenshot that we took earlier. See, so I've got this screenshot, and I'm going to move the screenshot right down into textures. And do I want to put it in the project text folder? Yes, I do. Okay, so if I drag this texture onto this plane, you can see now that I've got a good reference. The problem is it's not proportionally correct. And the easiest way to quickly fix that is to look down here at resolution. Resolution is 1233 by 840. So what I'm going to do is go to my plane. I'm going to do 1233 by 840 so that the aspect ratio is correct and it matches the numbers here on the resolution of the screen grab that I did. I'm going to take the plane, I'm going to scale it back down. Okay, so it's pretty close to what I'm working with here. Move this back on the Z-axis so you can see now it's behind. You want it behind, and the reason for that is if it's up here, when we go to our front view, we're going to have problems. See, now for reference, we need to look straight on, so that's the front view. We're going to use quick shading, so we can see this here, and it's in the way of our object, which is why you need to keep it back on the Z-axis so that what you're working with is in front. The other thing I'm going to do is click on my texture, go to the specular, go to the basic tab, turn off specular. You don't need specular. That'll make it look a little less washed out. The other thing we'll do, and this isn't so much in this case, but in more complicated cases, when you have more complicated texture or reference, you're going to want to see a better representation in the viewport. So under texture preview size, I'm going to do 1 meg. It's pretty good, but I'll take that up a little more. Let's do 1024 by 1024. That's 4 meg, and that looks a lot better in the viewport. Now, since our logo is pretty simple, it really won't take up that many resources. I'm going to go ahead and save often. Remember that, Command S all the time. Alright, so what else are we going to do with this? Well, we're going to type out the text, and we're going to line up this logo with the reference. Now, this doesn't have to be 100% perfect. It's just for reference. So we got that lined up. Now we got to line up Bohan Electrical. So under Brograph, you've got Mo Text. Create this text, and we're going to name it Bohan Electrical. And I'm going to copy what I wrote up here because I'm going to want to use that text. I'll paste it down here in the text field. The font we're going to use, wait for it. I really don't like the font system. I wish I could hit the first letter of the font and have it come up to that font, but it doesn't work that way. You actually have to scroll through. And we're going to look up Gotham HTF. Black, I believe, is what it is. Rather than be left justified, we're going to go with center, which is called middle align. Just scale it down and make sure that it is the same size. And we're pretty close. You'll notice here that the horizontal spacing's a little bit off. That's a little bit better. That's pretty close. So now if we come back to this view, this is what we got. Alright, so now turn off that plane that was a reference, because you don't need that anymore. We've got this. And I'm looking at this. I have an extrude on, and I don't have an extrude on the text, but the text is extruded by default. The depth is set to 5. Now if I bring it up to 20, you can see that's probably too much, because when you start putting textures on electrical, it's going to get a little lost in here. It's extruded too much, so I'm going to go with 10 in the middle. I think that's pretty good. And the other thing I'm going to do with the text, I'm going to do kind of an opposite bevel than what I did with the logo above. I'm going to set this, go to my caps, select start and end, fillet cap on both sides. I'm only going to do one step, and I'm going to make that one step about 1 centimeter. So I got more of a hard edge on the word electrical, on Bohan electrical. Alright, so what about colors? We have got a white background first of all. So we need to make a background object. This is only for reference. We're going to double click down here in materials to make a material. Go to color. Under texture right here, we're going to select gradient. And we're going to go to circular. And instead of black here, we're going to put white. And in here, we're going to put slightly darker than white. You know, just a very mild gray. We're going to put that on the background object. Now when we render, you can see that we got a little bit of a gradient going, kind of a vignette-y looking thing. That's going to be changed later in After Effects. So this is just for reference when you're looking at your textures and trying to figure out how you're going to light everything. And that way things don't get lost. Because, for example, I'm going to make a new texture, and this texture color is going to be black. I'm going to put it on Bohan Electrical. Now, if the background was not there, you wouldn't really be able to tell what you were doing. So that's why we just make this as a reference for now. Alright, Bohan Electrical. Now, it's a little washed out, you'll notice here. You don't usually want to stick with the default specular. My philosophy is high and pointy. Can't fail with the high and pointy. Make this a little bit higher here. Okay. So our specular is way up now. Now you don't see it right now, but once we start putting in a little bit more lighting, a little bit more environment, it's going to start showing up a little bit. So if we need to adjust it later, we will. So color number 1, we're going to go back to Illustrator. We want to pick this color. Something that kind of bugs me about Cinema 4D is you can't enter hex values, and that drives me nuts. I wish I could take this hex value and just plug it in, but I can't. So I'm going to set this to the side of my other monitor. You won't be able to see it, but that's fine. I'm going to make a new texture using the RGB values that I pulled from Illustrator, which was 49, 148, and 209. Alright, that is my blue color. And I just put it in the specular. Great. Let me do that again. 49, 148, and 209. Alright. Got my nice blue. I'm going to copy and paste that, and then I'm going to go back to Illustrator, click on color pick. It's going to bring up the RGB values for the right side, which is 230, 98, 36. I'm going to go back to Cinema 4D, and I'm going to change the values of this color, 230, 98, and 36. Alright. Close out my Illustrator colors here. Alright, so we got to do each side, and in the reference, the blue is on the left and the orange-red is on the right. So right now, we've got this extrude NURBS, and it has both of these pieces in here. Now, we want to animate all these little pieces, as well as put different colors on them. So we'll separate it. I'm going to turn off, hit the X next to extrude, turn off the extrude. Then I'm going to get my lasso selection. You could also use polygon. I'm going to go to line select mode, and on my logo I'm going to lasso up just this section right here. My bad, it's got to be in point mode. Yeah, okay. So just get this section right here, so you can see that only that is selected. Under mesh, we'll go to commands and we'll split. You can see what that does is that creates a second version. And if I turn it off and just click on this one spline, you can see just the one that I selected. Okay, so now we'll go back to here and we're going to select just this piece. Do the same thing. Split it. Now we're going to select this piece. Do the same thing. Mesh, command, split. We're splitting up these pieces. Now, to make it easier, I'm going to click and hold on this menu. At the top there's this little bar, and if I let go of my mouse, it kind of pulls it out for me. So I can use this command over and over. Your other option is you could hit Shift C and you could use their little quick search tool to do this as well. Now I'm going to select this section, split it, this section, split it, and finally this section, split it. Alright. Now we got all these logos. Let's make sure we got them right. That one, the two pieces, these two pieces. Looks like I'm missing one piece. I don't know how I did that. Somehow I'm missing this piece. Split it. I'm going to delete my master logo, which had everything. So you can see those two pieces on the sides, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 in the middle. Whew, that was rough. Okay. So, when I turn extrude back on, I don't see everything extruded. Why is that? Well, that is because under extrude, you have to specify that you want it to be hierarchical. You got your extrude back. The other thing, though, is that we don't want this to be under one extrude. We don't want this to be one object. We actually want each one of these to be its own object. So, I'm going to copy this. There are 6 pieces in it, so I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it 5 times. Makes sense, right? Then I'm going to delete the other logos in all of these. So each one has its own piece. They all say logo. I probably should have named them first, but whatever. And if you're having trouble following that, I'll show you here in a second. Alright, when I put all these together, turn them off. What do we got? Left side, right side, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I went in and I deleted all but the first one, and then on the next one all but the second one, all but the third one, so that there's only one in each one. But they're all the same and they're all in the same place. Now, the problem with these pieces not being together is that they all need to have their own center point. So I'm going to use the Enable Axis Modification tool, and I'm going to use that to line these up. Now, if I select, I'm going to turn off these other extrusions so it's not complicated and I can tell which one I'm working on. I'm working on this one right here. And on this logo, spline, I'm going to go to the Mesh menu, Axis Center, and then there's this Axis Center. It's got 3 dots because when you click on it, it comes up with a window. And in this case, I think defaults are going to be fine. I'm going to execute center points there. I'm going to go ahead and move it in the middle. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like exactly the middle point. It's just if you're going to rotate this, this is probably where you want it to rotate. Same thing will apply on the other side. I'm going to execute, and see, that one didn't work as well. I'm going to move it over here though, and this, it's not rocket science. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just want it to, you know, rotate normally and not have the axis way off in left field or something like that. Same thing with these. Looks like if I change the points on all of these, looks like these actually do go to the middle of the objects. That's good. Now, only thing is, for example, let me just turn everything off here. Let's look at just this one, and we'll name these here in a second too. The axis point of the parent extrude object is not the same. So if you were to take this extrude object and rotate it, sorry, had my modification tool on. If you were to rotate this, it's not rotating in the middle. That's not what you want. You want the extrude object to have the same axis point as the spline object underneath the child object does. So what do? Well, you could go one by one and you could type this in, or you could go to a menu and do this. And this is called center parent to. You want the parent to be centered to what you have selected. In this case, I have this piece of this logo selected. I want to center parent to. I'm going to hit Shift C and I'm going to type this in. Center parent to. Okay, enter. Click on my extrude. You see it now has the same axis point. There we go. Now I don't want to type that in every single time because I got to do all of these. So what's great is you can do them all at once. Center parent to. Now when we go back, these are all the same as their child spline object. I'm going to turn everything back on. The other way you could have done that is you could go to Mesh menu, Axis Center, and then do Center Parent to. But it's kind of a pain to go through that step every time. You could also pull out this menu if you were going to do a bunch of those. Now, on each of these, we're going to go ahead and name them. I'm going to call this left. The one on the right, I'm going to call right. How about that? Make sure I got the right one here. Same down here, left side. Okay, I'm going to call this left hole? I don't know. No, I'm going to call it top hole. Sometimes it's hard to get creative and name these pieces that don't really mean anything. Bottom hole. Of course, now that would apply on the other side. So this needs to be left bottom hole. Left top bottom hole. This will be right bottom hole and right top hole. Yes, I'm anal about naming things, but you know what? When you do a big project, it's worth it. Now, all of these together, what am I going to do? I'm going to parent it. I'm going to hit Alt-G. They're parented. I'm going to name that Logo. So now I've got my one null that contains everything in here, but all the individual pieces are set and ready to be animated in a really nice way. And all your axes are correct, and your rotational points are going to be right. and you spent the extra time getting that just right so that you won't have problems with it later on. The other thing about this is, since we have these sections separated, we can take the 3 lefts right here and we can parent those in a null, call it left. Do the same with the right and call it right. Now on the left we can click and drag the blue texture in, and on the right texture onto the null, and all the child objects will inherit that material. I'll hit render. Now usually this is where someone would leave it. That's it. There's your 3D animation. There's your 3D logo. Pay me. But guess what? We want to make it look pretty. And first thing we got to do is light it. And we're not going to just put lights everywhere. We're going to approach this the way that you would approach a real lighting scenario, IRL. Spotlight. We're going to use a spotlight for a lot of things. As these tutorials progress, you'll see that there aren't a lot of Omni lights. Alright. So, I'm going to use this spotlight. I'm on the top view. I'm going to pull out a little bit here, because if my elements are flying into place from around right here, we're going to need that area lighted as well. If you set your lights real close, that'll be all well and good. It will look nice, except when stuff is flying in to get to its place, it's going to be in the dark. So make these kind of broad. Now, this is the top view. We are not using any sort of fall off right now, so this point right here on the top, you can put that as anywhere you want, really. I like to put it, past my object so I have a good idea of where I'm going. Now I'm going to move this light slightly off, but not too much, and then aim it toward the center of my logo. Now if I look at it from this view, I can see that the light is kind of in the center. I want it to be coming from above. And hello. I'm going to use the move tool, and I'm going to move this light up and then rotate it down so that I kind of have a straight line going to the center of the logo from my light. If you look at it here in your right view, you can see exactly where it's pointed. Alright, that looks good. Not much different from before though. And there's some other things that we need to do. Number one, and you can see that some of the specular coming through on the text now from that light. But number one, to make this look good, we need to turn on shadows. Now, it might not look so great in this particular situation because there's not really like a name plate, but I'm still going to put on soft shadows at a high shadow map of like 2000 by 2000. Now, you will get some shadows inside the logo. I am, however, going to show you when this is more important. And it is when you're working with something that has some sort of box behind it, like a nameplate, like you have a square with a logo in it or a cube with a logo in it. So if that were the case, you would kind of have a plate behind the logo. And using shadows will actually make that look nice. You see, you get these shadows back on the plate. Now you would have to do some adjusting here, but it's nice to have shadows in this kind of situation just to add to it. See, these are really dirty looking shadows, so you would just adjust bias and stuff like that. But that's not what we're learning today. What I do want to tell you though, this is a little secret. If you are attempting to create shadows on something and you put your object right up on another object, look and see what kind of shadows you get. Okay, those are okay. But if you really want good shadows, you actually keep the objects off of each other. If you can see in here, they're not touching each other, and that gives you better looking shadows. Just thought I'd do that little aside because lots of times you're working on a logo that has a backdrop attached to it. especially bad logos. The next step we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the light that we already made. This one was our key light, and we're going to label it key. Copy and paste it and call it fill. Now, the fill light will not have shadows. This is the thing. Only one light in your scene is going to have shadows. The others are irrelevant. You're just going to create too many other shadows all over the place. It's going to get messy. Only one light with shadows right now. So, on that fill light, those shadows are off. I'm going to rotate it the opposite direction and have it come from the other side opposite the the key light. I'm going to pull the fill light back and I'm going to widen it a little bit. Okay. Still very bright now. And we have to adjust specular on a lot of stuff right now. But we don't want to do it until we get to a point where it actually matters. This specular might change based on reflectivity, it might change based on specular light at the top, all sorts of variables that we don't know about yet. So it's not worth our time to really adjust textures yet. Next, we're going to create another spotlight. Places it at default, at origin, and rotate it 80 degrees. So it's just 10 degrees off from being pointed straight down at a 90-degree angle. It's 80 degrees. You can see what's going on here. Now, if I move this light up, let me go to a bigger view. You can see how it's shining down at a really harsh angle onto this logo. And that's because this is our specular light. We're going to call it spec. Now it's time to adjust the intensities of our lights. The key light with the shadows and such, under general, we're going to change the intensity to 80. Under our fill light, we're going to adjust it to 60. That's filling out some of these shadows in here caused by the key light. You can already tell that this is starting to look better. This is starting to look a lot nicer. Has a better gradient look to it. It's not blown out anymore. And we need to do the specular light as well. Now in specular, we are going to turn off right here diffuse. We are not casting any regular light on this. This is strictly a specular light. If you hold down Option R, you get real-time feedback on what you're doing. I'm going to use this arrow and I'm going to jack it up a little bit more here so we can see that, not really real-time feedback, but we can get a quick render going in the viewport as we're updating. Specular light, I'm going to change the intensity to between 200 and 300 actually, because since you have no diffuse light in here, it's not the same. I'll show you the difference. Now you see that specular edge going on right there. If I had the actual light on diffuse, look how bright that gets. That's way too blown out. We are only using this light and blowing it out so we can really define that edge on the top. It looks pretty. 300 might be too much. I'll try 300 here and we'll just see what it does. Yeah, it's a bit much. I mean, it might be a good effect in some cases, but we're going to take it back down. You'll notice that it's also having an effect on these black letters down here. Personally, I think that we still have too much extrude going on, because look at this A, for example. You know, once we brought these bevels out, you really can't see inside of the A. Not pretty. I think for one, we're going to bring down the radius to 0.5. So we'll still be picking up specular on the sides, but we're also going to thin these letters out a little bit because they're already extremely bold. And on object, we're going to change the depth back to 5 actually, because you can't see like the middle of the A and stuff like that. And I think that looks a lot better. Maybe I'll do a happy medium. I don't know. Let's try 7. Can we still see through? barely. I don't know. You know what? I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to go with 5. There's not much extrusion on these letters, but you know what? It's all about what's readable, right? The next step will be to do a sky. Now, when you're doing a sky, you have tons of options. You can go out there on the internet and get HDRI photos and stuff like that. You can make your own. There's a great app called PhotoSynth by Microsoft. You can get it on your iPhone. I think Android has it too, and you can create your own environments and skies and stuff like that. But I like to use the default one, or one of the default ones in Cinema 4D. You go to the window menu and you go to the content browser. You go to presets and then you hit search. Now what comes up is HDRI, which I had in here last time, and when you hit enter you get all these HDRI photos. There is a glitch, however. If you do this more than once, you lose your results, and I don't understand. It's been here for like 3 versions of Cinema 4D. And if you want to search again, it doesn't let you search or something. It'll happen, trust me. The only way around this is to delete what you wrote in the search box, turn off search, click back on presets, click back on search, and then type it again, HDRI. Trust me, it will happen to you at some point, and you'll wonder why you're not getting results. So the one that I like to do all the time, HDRI 004. That's my go-to. And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to create a sky. I'm going to put the HDRI image material onto the sky. And there it is. Now if I hit render, I can kind of see this environment, but it's not picking up on any of the pieces of the logo, and that's because there are no reflections on the logo. I'm going to select all 3 materials that I'm using on the logo, which are right here. I'm going to go to my basic tab and turn on reflection, and by default it makes it like 100% reflective, so when you render it, it's completely reflective like a mirror. So obviously don't want that. What I will suggest is that in your reflection, by default you go to 30. A lot of people like to use Fresnel sometimes they don't. I am not really big into using Fresnel textures added to my reflection, but I will show you what it looks like. You get like a different kind of fall off basically. And this is a bad case as well. Something like a sphere or something like that would look a lot better. So I'm just going to clear that. We'll go back to 30. Now different types of textures actually will reflect different. If you had an all white texture, it's going to reflect more or less than a black texture, and so you have to adjust your brightness depending on each color. We have set 30 by default on all 3 of these. Now we need to go into these individually and adjust them. I'm going to take this interactive render region all the way up so I can really see what I'm working on. Now in black you can see what happens if I start turning these up and down. I'm going to go with 40 I think on this for the black. I think that's pretty good. Still picks up a little bit of reflection. That's good. Then I'm going to go to the blue. I'm going to bring that up and down and just kind of see what we get. I kind of like, see how you can see this line here? Starting to see a little bit of the room at 50. I like that. I'm going to try the same thing on this color, but it may or may not reflect the same. I am getting some. But it's really taking away from the color. I'm going to leave it at 50 as well, and we'll just go with that. Look at it from a few different sides. I like how that looks. Now, in these reflections, if you would like, and if it works in your situation, you can blur the reflection. But you got to keep it low because this takes a lot of render time. I'm going to do 5. You can see what happens in these reflections here after I do that. it starts blurring out. Oh, of course I'm only on this color, so let me show you over here. Alright, notice that it's blurring the reflections out, but it takes a lot longer. A better way to go, Amber Alert. A better way to go is to blur your sky map, because it's going to be blurred from the get-go just one time, and you're going to not have to have a computer calculate those blurred reflections in every single frame. I'm going to turn off my interactive render region. And kind of center this up with a bit of tilt to it. So my camera is kind of looking up at the logo and off to the side just a little bit. And I'm going to say that this is kind of where I would like everything to land. Once this is kind of centered up where you want it, kind of at that angle, that looks nice, go ahead and create a camera. And hit the target button next to it so that you're actually looking through the lens of that camera, basically. Now go to frame, let's say 60. This is where we want it to end right now. And click a keyframe right there. And then go back to frame 0. Click on Logo up here in your object browser. You're going to slightly come back around, rotate around this way. Click on your camera again, make sure you do that, then set a keyframe on your camera. So you can see there's this nice slight move as your pieces float in. And once it hits frame 60, you want it to keep moving. You don't want it to just completely stop abruptly. You want it to keep moving a little bit. So click on Logo over here so that we're rotating around this. Give it just a very slight move. Click back on camera, set your keyframe at 90. You can see from 60 to 90, it's just barely moving. Not as much as the move we had here at the beginning. The only thing about this is if you play it back, watch what happens. It's a little wonky. It's a little weird. When it gets to 60, it kind of stops and then goes to its next point. That's because we want these two frames right here, 60 and 90 or 89, to be linear interpolation, which is right here. If you click and slide and select over those two frames, you see they get highlighted here in the timeline. Change them to linear. Once it hits, it's going to be a lot smoother. In fact, we're going to go click Logo and make this more of a dramatic angle at frame 0. You can see that's more dramatic now. Click on camera, re-keyframe that point, so there's more of a move going on from 0 to 60. And then from 60 to 90, it's just very slight. Play that back. Now the reason we're doing this is because once we hit frame 60, that's when everything kind of lands. From 0 to 60, everything is building. And once it lands, you can read it for the last second there from 60 to 90. So, now we need these pieces to fly. How are we going to do that? Well, first of all, these two pieces here I would like to see move kind of in opposite directions. And we work backwards when we do this stuff. We know everything is landing at 60, at frame 60. So we'll dig down into our logo, all these extrudes that we made earlier. And I'm going to start by pulling out the right and the left. So I have Command clicked on right and left. And I'm going to set a keyframe here at 60 for both of these. That's where they're going to land. Now that's set, okay? We're going to go back to 0 and pull these toward us on the Z-axis. So they're kind of out here, kind of off the screen. And I'm going to click a keyframe. Now that might not be where we want them, but the keyframe will just get them to stay there for now. So we can kind of move around and see what's going on. They're over here past the camera. What I would like to do is see both of these come in from opposite at opposite rotations. So at frame 0, I'm going to rotate negative 90 degrees on the blue one. And I'm going to keyframe that. Then on the red one or orange one, the right one, I'm going to rotate that in the other direction. Oops. Rotate in the other direction, holding down Shift so I can hit these 10-degree increments, and once it hits 90 I'm going to keyframe that. Now watch what happens when we come in. See how they both rotate separately like that? The only thing is, you want this to be visually interesting, and so it would be a lot better if that came past the camera. Now how do we make it come back past the camera? Now we could put this down in front of the camera, but we want it to come past the camera. So let's say about 15 frames we want to really start seeing these pieces past the camera. So we'll go to 15 frames and we'll click on the right and left, and you can see the starting points right here and right here are the starting points for these objects. And what we want it to do is pass the camera at frame 15. We're at frame 15. We grab the handles for each of these. And using all the viewports, we actually start lining this up to where it looks visually interesting at frame 15. Now you can see what I'm doing here because I'm adjusting the keyframe 0 so that when it gets to this point at 15 you'll start to see them. You don't want to start them in front of the camera. You want them to reveal. This is probably too close to the camera, so we're going to go like this. Put them past the camera right about here. See, right here is frame 15, right on that dot. This is 1. Now I want them to be a little higher once they get to frame 15, so over here in this view, I'm going to bring them up. So we're starting to see something going on down here. And if I go through, you can see what's happening. I like the blue one. I don't like the orange one. So I'm going to adjust that one only. I actually want it closer to the logo. And I think I might want it higher as well. Now notice at frame 0 you can still see it, so that's not going to work. It needs to be further back. I'm going to take it back in this direction, over the camera. It's all about kind of adjusting things until you see something that's visually interesting. See, this is coming from both sides now. So if I were to render one of these frames in here, see what's going on? You've got all these cool reflections. All of it's kind of coming together, and it's visually interesting because you're looking at it from different angles, and you're seeing the specular go across and the reflections move around. It's a lot more interesting than just making it come straight on. The other thing that we're going to do is with these pieces right here in the center, we're going to have them fly in from above the camera. So you'll have these come in from kind of the bottom, the other ones come in from the top, but they'll get real close to the camera. So select the right top and right bottom, and then the left top and bottom. So you got all 4 of them. Just drag over to frame 60 and set a keyframe, because that's where they're going to land. They're all going to come in here at the same time. I accidentally duplicated something. Let's try that again. Go to frame 60, keyframe. Alright. So working backwards again, we'll put these close to the camera, kind of within range, so that we can start getting it in the right place to come in from the top. So we'll say right here is where we'd like to see it. We don't want them to get much closer than that, and then I'm just going to move it up and out I'm going to set a keyframe for all 4 of those at frame 0. Now, they're going to come in, but they're just coming in like straight on. Not very interesting. Let's actually get them a little bit closer to the camera. Let's do that same thing we did before. Let's move up in the animation. So you can see here, here are the keyframes for those 4 pieces, moving back and forth, back and forth. Let's put it in the middle, or not quite the middle, I guess. I'll do like a quarter, because that's where we want to start seeing these pieces. And at that point, they're too high. So we'll take each one of these and figure out how we can make them look interesting. That's a blue one. We're going to leave it to the left. An orange one. I'll line these up. We're going to bring this one this way. Moving these to places where they're right off of camera. And same thing with this last one. I'd like this one to be a little closer to the camera. You know, spend that time and place everything again to where it looks visually interesting. Now, the only thing I don't like about this, number one, is it looks like the blue ones are getting too close to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that, so that they are different. This blue one, move it further down. Alright, the other thing is that these need to rotate as well. So if you turn off this target in your camera view so you can get a look at your scene, see where these pieces are coming from, we'll go adjust these individually. I'm going to click on left top, and I'm actually going to rotate it. Let's do 180 degrees. Reset that keyframe. Next one. I'm going to rotate 90 degrees this way, 90 degrees this way. This is just kind of, you know, whatever you feel like, whatever works, you know. We're going to make sure things don't intersect in a second. This one I'm just going to do just random. And then this one I'm going to rotate 180 degrees this way. So they're all just kind of coming in from wherever. It doesn't look to me like anything's intersecting. That's good. You don't want to have intersections. You can see the blue ones here are getting a little bit close, but I think they'll be fine. I'm going to switch to my quick shading view so that you can see this better. You don't really want to see shadows right now. So this is how they come together. And if we go back to camera and click on the little target next to it, we can see the pieces coming together. And watch what happens when we hit render now. Lots of interesting stuff going on there. So the next piece of it that we want to do is the letters, Bowhand Electrical. Now there's a million ways you can make these fly in, but I'm going to show you a brute force method because I think it's very essential that you know how to do something like this brute force and you're not using Brograph all the time and relying on it for animation. You got to know those essentials. And I'm going to show you how to do a really cool technique to make these kind of cascade on. And it's done in such a way to where it doesn't take too much work. It's obviously going to be more work than doing something with Brograph, but it has a cool effect. It will look nice, and it's worth spending the time on. So I've got Bowhand Electrical here, and I'm going to copy and paste it so we have a new one at the top. This one at the bottom is just kind of for reference now, and we're going to turn it off. The one at the top, if you, I'm going to take the number 1 off the end there. If you hit C, what that does is that kind of mixes this down into geometry. Well, it will if you do it again, I guess, but this will mix it down into individual letters. kind of like when you mix stuff down with the letter C. But it's still extruded objects. It's not actual like mesh or anything like that. So select from B all the way down to the end of electrical, and then command click on the word for the null electrical. You just want these extruded letters to be highlighted only. On frame 60, we're going to set a keyframe, and that's setting a keyframe for all the letters. Then we're going to go down to frame 30. On frame 30, we want to rotate. Now, before you do anything, on your rotate tool, you need to go to your object axis and say per object manipulation. Well, why do you have to do that? If you're not using that, when you rotate, it rotates the whole entire thing. We don't want that. We want to do per object manipulation. See what happens? It rotates each individual as if you were just editing that one piece. So, frame 30, we're going to rotate these out so that they're facing the other direction. We're also going to rotate them down flat. Now this isn't, again, this isn't a perfect thing. We're not going for rocket science. This doesn't have to be like a perfect 90-degree angle, just kind of somewhere in that region. Also, we want to adjust the scale. And when we adjust the scale, we want to make sure that we keyframe it, which means you have to be in object mode, not model mode, if you want the scaled keyframes to actually pick up. I'm going to go to scale, and I'm going to bring these down, not all the way, but, you know, pretty close to 0, probably about 10% of what they were. You're going to click keyframe again. Okay, so now you got this little cascade thing going, which is cool. It's picking up the specular, which is nice, but we're not done with it yet. When we get to halfway at frame 45, we actually want a keyframe where the letters come forward slightly and get larger slightly. So we pulled it forward on Z. We're going to way scale these up right here, which means we're going to have some problems. We're going to have some intersection problems possibly, but we'll get around that. So they're pulled forward, they're bigger. Frame 45, set a keyframe. Okay, see what's happening now? They get big and then smaller into place. Okay, well that's cool, but we want these to all kind of cascade. The other thing we want these to do is to fade in. So if you go to tags, Cinema 4D tags, and then you click on the display tag, it will put a display tag down for all of these. Frame 30 is where it will be set to 0 visibility. Now, I only like to fade in like 3 keyframes, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to type GGG because that actually goes forward on your timeline. So we are at frame 33. We're going to turn on use the visibility, and we're going to hold down command and click this little button right here to keyframe the visibility of these letters to 100%. We're going to hit FFF, which takes us back to frame 30, 3 frames back. Now we're going to set the visibility over here to 0%, and we're going to keyframe that. So within 3 frames, these will kind of fade up within the scene. Like that. Now let's go take a look at them. Let's look at frame 31. What do we get? Well, it looks like it's fading up. That's good. By 33, they're faded up. Now to do the cascading thing, here's what we need to do. We've got Bohan and electrical and all these display tags selected all together. We're going to right click on not the tag, but on one of the objects and say show tracks. And that brings up just those specified tracks right here. That's nice. You can scale, you can move, everything. It's the same commands that you use in your viewport when you're scaling and all of that. I'm going to select all, And well, I thought I could select all. I guess I have to there we go, shift back to where I was. Alright, so everything on the left side, it's way overkill. It's way too much information. We don't need all of this information to cascade this. If you right click, you can say fold all, and it folds all those individual sub keyframe drop downs in, so that you're just looking at the names of the objects. B plus its display tag, O plus its display tag, and so on. So 2 at a time, we're going to start pushing each one of these over by 3 keyframes. So O, H, and I'm using the G key and I'm hitting it 3 times, which goes forward 3 frames every time. Or in this case, because my display tags I already know are 3 frames, you can pretty much see where each one of these is going to go. You don't really have to move the cursor on the timeline to get that right. So those are done. Those are all cascaded nicely. The only problem is they're going past our 90 our 90 frames that we've set up for this project. And here's what's cool about the timeline is if you Command A, which selects all, you can then move your entire piece around where you want it to go. The other thing about this is you can actually change the overall frames together, and it scales the entire thing. Now what we want to do is make sure that these come into place and they don't intersect the logo. And so I'd like it to come in pretty fast. You can see here that I've put it at about 1 second for the entire cascade from 0 to 30. See, I can stretch this out and change the entire cascade's time. See how it's cascading now? It's a really cool effect, but I want it to happen a little bit later, and I'm going to move it down, and I'm just making sure that there are no intersections going on right here, which I don't see any. They might be intersecting slightly in the back, but nobody's going to see that. It's not coming through. I'm going to close the timeline so we can see better here. Nice little cascade. That's nice. I think it might be a little bit fast. I like that it ends at 60. I think it's too fast, so I'm going to go back to the timeline and drag these back out to 0 right here. See what we get. Make sure we don't have any intersections. I don't think we do. Everything looks good. Now see how when these are turning, they actually catch that specular? That's really nice. Alright, so what about the background? We want all these reflections, but we don't want to see the background. So what do we do about that? We use compositing tags. Go to your sky, click on tags, Cinema 4D tags, and make a compositing tag. Now under your tag tab, you are going to tell this sky here that it does not need to be seen by camera. So you uncheck this, and then what happens? You have your nice white background from before. Just looking at this in general, I can tell you that the specular is not right on these two colors, because we never really did set that. But now that we have reflections and specular, let's set it. Let's go to specular. Notice I have both of these selected, and I'm going to make it, again, high and pointy. There we go. That's starting to look a little less washed out. I like the point, but I actually want a thinner base. There we go. So it keeps those rich colors in there. It doesn't wash out. So you have a really cool shine thing going on the sides of the specular, and you've got the reflections and the edges, and it's a lot cleaner looking than if you were just to plop that logo in there and put an extrude on it. And now we can scroll back. We can kind of look at different pieces, what this looks like. Again, we use that Alt-R, and we can kind of see this quick update here, quick render. Now, something that I learned a long time ago was about transparency and sky objects. If I zoom in here, look at some of these objects that we have going. If I were to render this, and it's not so much visible on this particular animation, but it can be in many other animations that you do with this similar technique. If I render this, look at this. I'm seeing straight through to that sky object. Why is that? That's because you also need to turn off this thing called Seen by Transparency. You do not want, when something is transparent, like in this case, it's fading up, you don't want the sky to be seen by that transparency. So I'll keep this little live render thing going here. Turn off Seen by Transparency, and look, it goes away. So now, if we go step through this animation, it's fading up with this white background. So what do we do now that we have this in place? Nice little logo animation with all the pieces moving. Render it and we bring it into After Effects. Now I'm going to teach you a technique if you do or don't have Cineware of how you can kind of keep your project moving like while you're rendering, kind of keep tweaking it and keep working on it. First thing is I'm going to hit Command B, and that brings up these render settings. And in the render settings, I'm going to change the output to frame range of all frames because I want to render the whole thing. I want to save it. I'm going to click on these three dots, and on our structure we were talking about earlier, we have the Cinema 4D folder, and that sub render folder, that's where our render is going to go, and we're going to call it render and hit save. We also want to save some other things. We want to save some multipass information. If you click multipass, it would be kind of nice to put motion vector in this if you have the right plugins like RSMB. I'm going to turn on multipass. Maybe we want to put something like depth in there. We're not really going to go through this per se right now, but if you have these on, you need to know that down here in multipass, you want to put a save location as well. Now go back up to where you were saving your initial render, this area right here. Select all, which is Command A, and you'll hit Command C to copy it, and then you'll paste it back down here. These can have the same name because this puts suffixes on the end of the file. The other thing that you want to do here, we're doing TIFFs, we're doing 8-bit. We want an alpha channel for sure. We also want, we don't want PSD, we don't want Photoshop files for the multipass. So we want to do TIFF PSD layers, and we do not want multi-layer files. We want each pass to be its own separate TIFF sequence, not like one Photoshop file with a bunch of stuff in it. If you're working on a really difficult, complicated, long time to render project, you will probably want to use this workflow because Cineware is going to take way too long to render these frames, and you're going to want to be able to start working on tweaking your look and your color and all that while your render is going. And this is how you do that. You go to Options and turn off shadows, turn off reflection, turn off refraction, turn off transparency. We're turning off all this extra stuff that takes forever to render. We're also going to go to anti-aliasing. We're going to change it back to none. So this is very, very standard, easy render because there's really not much to do. See how different it looks? What we're going to do with this, though, is we're going to go ahead and render this whole sequence really fast so that we can get these frames as placeholders in After Effects. So I'm going to let that render right now. I'm going to hit Shift-R. And we're beginning to render. Now that the render is done, you can kind of scroll through it here. You can see what it looks like. Not very great looking. But that's okay, because we're just using placeholder frames. I'll show you why. We're going to move into After Effects and start a new composition. We're going to save it in that same project directory from before. We're going to go to the AE folder. I'm going to call it Logo. Now, in our render directory under Cinema 4D is where we have all of these individual passes. We've got depth. Now you can click on any of these. It doesn't matter. You can click on any of these as long as TIFF sequence is on, and it will pick up the whole sequence, which is nice. You don't want you don't have to go to like find frame 0 of every single one. I see depth. I click on any of these that say depth. I hit open. And I click again, scroll down a little bit till I see another one. Motion, click on any of them, hit open. Same thing. And then we're going to get the regular render pass. So we've got these 3 passes. We've got render, render motion, and render depth. Render, I'm going to drag into a new comp. If I scroll through, I can see the animation. It has an alpha channel, so if I turn on alpha, I can see what's going on here. Well, what's nice about this? It is the fact that you have your entire animation here as a reference. If you want to tweak something, especially in a long animation at different points, you can do that. Like if I wanted to see how let me set this to frames. Forget how you do that. Control click right here. Frames. If I want to see what frame 35 looks like when it's really rendered, I'm going to go back to Cinema 4D. I'm going to go to frame 35. Hit Command B and bring my options back up. Now we're going to put all this stuff back from before. Turn on transparency, refraction, reflection, shadow. Go back to anti-aliasing. Turn that back to best. Now, if we hit render in here, everything's back on. I'm going to hit Command B real quick. Go back to your render settings. Now, under output, right now we just want to do this one frame. We're going to say current frame. We're rendering frame 35 because we want to see what that's going to look like in here. We can tweak it that way. So I'm going to hit Shift R. It's going to ask me if I want to overwrite those TIFF files. I say yes. I let that render out. And now I go back to After Effects. I can't see it yet, but if I right click and say reload footage, it'll reload those frames. Now frame 35 looks kind of like our final render. All the others aren't, but that's okay because now we can go in and tweak just this one if we'd like. One of the things I am going to tell you to do, and if I zoom in you'll see the edge of these? See there's a little bit of white there in the alpha channel? That is because we left on that white background. So if you delete or double click on these little buttons to turn off your little traffic light thing here, you will not have the white rendering anymore. And if you re-render and then you go back over to After Effects and reload that footage, you won't see that little white from the background being picked up. We don't want that. So now that we've got this animation where it needs to be and we've got it in After Effects, we can go back to Cinema 4D and let it render in the background while we start tweaking things. I'm going to close my renderer. And the one thing that I do want to do, you remember that specular light that we put on before? That's straight ahead. If you hit Alt-R, you can see that it's hitting right here on the left side. I'm going to go to top view, and I'm going to move the specular light to the left. I'm going to keep going. Let's see. I'm going to have it start at the edge right here of Bohan. And I'm going to go back to frame, let's see, what's a good frame? Let's say 40. And keyframe specular at 40, because that's going to start your specular over here on the left, and then all the way to the end, past when it lands, through the rest of the animation, the specular is going to be moving all the way to the other side. Keyframe on frame 90. So you can see what that's doing. That's going to go across, and if we just kind of step through, you can see the specular is moving I actually want to jack this up a little more because you can't really see it that much. I'm going to do 300. Now I'm going to take my specular as well and kind of widen that base. And see the specular right in this region. If I turn off the specular light, you can see how it kind of disappears. All this is doing by keyframing this is just it keeps the specular going even when the camera and the different pieces aren't moving that much. It's very subtle, but I think it's a good thing to have in here because all these different elements come together to make it interesting, and that's really what you want to do. The other thing we could do, if it works, in this situation, it won't be really that effective, but again, if you have one of those animations that has a logo that's kind of on a plate as it's rolling in, has a little bit of shadow and stuff, you might want to put some ambient occlusion in here. Under Effect, turn on ambient occlusion. Now, we can see what happens. It'll actually render out right now in this viewport, and there probably won't be much of a difference. So it's something to look at. You can kind of see it, but not really. Ambient occlusion is only going to work when you've got objects that are all like touching each other or on top of each other, where you can really see those shadows. And this isn't a good example of that, and this would just be a waste of time to leave on your ambient occlusion right now. So we'll uncheck that. Now we do have this one frame, frame 35, that we've rendered, kind of like that. And then I'm going to move up here to where everything lands, frame 60. I would like to see that as well. And so I'm going to go to 60 and hit Shift R for render. And since we're set to render current frame, there we go. That one is now rendered. If I go back to After Effects and I refresh, reload my footage, we've got the nice shiny sparkly version. So the one thing about rendering the way that we are is now we can start the render going in Cinema, and we can start tweaking our look in After Effects all at the same time. You could do this if you put kind of segmented, broken up image sequences into After Effects. It's going to give you a crap ton of warnings, though, telling you that this is broken and this is broken and all these frames are missing. And the nice thing about the new CC is After Effects CC is in the preferences you can actually say, do not warn me about that anymore, for the love of God. Because when you have a whole bunch of TIFF sequences and they're all missing frames, it gets really annoying, and every time you move through the timeline it's warning you that things are missing. But it's nice to have these placeholders, especially if you have a lot of heavy After Effects integration with your animation after the fact. You kind of have a reference image, you know what it's going to look like, even if it's not the final version. And of course, like I said earlier, we're going to go back here and render, and we can just start tweaking in After Effects while it's going. So I'm going to go back to Output, and I'm going to set all frames for output, and hit Shift R and hit Yes. So now that is rendering out all the frames on my other window, and I'm going to go to After Effects to frame 60, which is the one that we rendered out. We need a background. So I'm going to do a new solid and hit OK. And in my effects, I'm going to type ramp. And I'm going to throw the ramp onto this layer. Change it to a radial ramp. And we're going to reset these points. We want this black one to be the midpoint, although it's not going to be black. We are going to set the color of this to pure white. This is like what we did in Cinema before. Set the end color to slightly lower than that. And then on the point for our end point, I'm going to zoom out slightly. I'm going to put that a little bit past the middle. So you got this white right here. I don't even know if that translates through the video or not. I hope it does. Maybe make this secondary color a little darker. Now if you grab the sides of the solid right here, you can kind of change the aspect ratio a little bit. As gives us a nice gradient for the background. And I will drag that behind the logo, and you can see what it looks like. The other thing that we can do is add motion blur if you have RSMB. And if you don't have it, I recommend that you buy it. It's a very good plugin. It's not like a regular fake motion blur. This actually uses the vector information that we exported out of Cinema 4D. So if you type RSMB into your effects and throw the Pro vectors onto your render, it's going to turn red. Don't worry. You need to select the source. Now, I'm going to show you the difference here. A lot of people like to use RSMB Pro. Just straight up RSMB Pro. Here's the problem. Look at this garbage going on over here. It's just garbage. That's not a real motion blur. It's just not figuring it out correctly. I'm going to delete this RSMB Pro. I mean, it's useful at sometimes, don't get me wrong, but we want to use the real thing because we can. RSMB Pro vectors, I'm going to throw it on here. Now, we need to select a source, and here's what you have to do when you create a source. If you take the motion layer and create a new composition, you'll see the colors that represent the speed at which these different pieces are going. Now, here's the only problem with doing something like this. This needs an alpha channel, and it doesn't have one. So we're going to pull it from the actual logo by putting the logo render itself on top. This is going to be a source for the alpha channel, so we're going to turn it off. And underneath, on our motion layer, we're going to use track matte alpha of the above layer. So now we have an actual alpha. Only problem is, you see the black lines going around this? We need to choke it. So we'll type choke, and we're going to put a matte choker onto that turned off render layer. Once that is on there, you can see the defaults fix it just fine. The black has gone away. If you turn it on and off, you can see what it does there. It makes it nice and smooth. And we want to kind of blur these edges as well. And so we'll do a fast blur right underneath it at 3. I always do the same settings for this. I do a matte choker and a fast blur of 3. So we're going to go back to render now. And still we don't have a source, so everything's red. What do? We take the motion, render motion composition that we made, and that's going to go into this project, and we're going to turn it off. This is only for reference, for referencing motion. So if we go back to our main render layer into the effects, you can see we haven't selected anything yet. We want number 3 here, which is render motion. Now, see the difference? When we come back to this section, this isn't just a cluster right here of just weirdness. You've got the motion going the correct way over here, the way it should be at the right velocity, and no motion blur over here. Everything looks a lot more real. It looks like how motion blur would actually look in this situation. And what's great about this is you don't render it out in Cinema 4D. You do it in After Effects. So if you want to adjust the amount of blur, you want to take the blur off, you want to adjust other things, it's all done after the fact, and you don't have to go back and re-render a bunch of times. So this is in here, and what's great about this now is in the meantime, our render has finished. So we've saved time because we're kind of multitasking here, and we had that kind of rough animation in here, and we let the rest of it go while we tweaked the look of the whole thing. If you want to add more, you can. You could leave it at this. One thing I recommend doing after your render is done is clicking on your image sequences and reloading everything. Sometimes After Effects just doesn't reload stuff correctly. You might even want to go to where is it? To edit and say purge all memory. Let it all purge out. Are you sure? You say yes, I'm not going to do that right now because it takes a long time, but it kind of frees up everything. Then you refresh everything, because what will happen every now and then, for some reason, it'll render out and one of those frames will not be correct. You want everything cached and flushed before you render. Another thing you can do, this is kind of another trick if you're running low on memory. I'm looking at my memory right now, and I have pretty good amount of free memory. I've got 13 gig free, but sometimes with Cinema 4D and other projects open at the same time, you're going to get a lot of inactive memory. And what you do to fix and free up some of that inactive memory is you open Terminal. That's assuming you have a Mac. And after it opens, this is real simple. You get the little login deal here, and you type purge. That's it. It's going to think it might kind of lock up. Hopefully it didn't lock up my recording, but it's going to free up that inactive memory that you had up here. In fact, it's actually freed up some of mine. And once you're really, really running out of memory, that's something that you're going to want to do, because the only way to really clear all that inactive memory out completely is to restart your computer, and you don't want to do that all the time. So now that this is done, the only thing that I'm going to add to this, just for fun, if you have a plugin like this, is I'm going to add a flare. And there's tons of different optical flares that you can use. I try not to overuse them because it's kind of like cliche, you know, oh, use the flare. But sometimes there are opportunities to use a flare where it's tasteful, or to where you're only using a very little bit of it, or it's kind of skimming the edge. But most of them kind of work like this. And it's, if you make an adjustment layer, which is Option Command Y, you can add your flares. Now, you might not have the same flares, don't worry about that. But what we want to do is use our existing logo animation as kind of an obstruction layer for this flare. Now, I really don't like the default. Under render mode, we want to put over original. You can see here's the flare. And we want to think about where this lands. We want the flare to be just coming up over the edge of this. And this is kind of cheesy. This isn't really where you would use a flare, but I'm just doing it to show you how it works. I'm going to pick something that's a little more natural, actually. Oh, which one do I want to choose? Let me try this. Train. And since we're on white, I'm going to have to kind of bring it out a little more. Now, here's where I'm talking about being subtle with these. I'm going to move my center point of this object over here. And then I'm going to bring up the brightness, because what's going to happen is I'm just going to get these cool, like, lens effects. I don't have to see the actual, like, source of the light. I'm going to bring it out here. Now, if you did want to have it in your scene, here's what you can do. You move your light back in. Let's say right here. There's these custom layers down here at the bottom. And you can actually pick which ones, foreground layers. You can pick which one that you want to be the obstruction layer. In this case, our render right here is going to be an obstruction layer. And it uses that alpha channel to figure out when the light needs to go on and off. So when it's being obstructed, and it's not just turning it off and on. You can see it's changing brightness as well. If I scroll through, if it's kind of on an edge, it will change brightness. I don't know if you can see that or not, which that's nice to have. But in this case, this really doesn't go with this. So we're just going to move this back here. And on frame 0, we will keyframe the position. Over here to the right, on frame 90, it's going to be up like this. And what that does is that just gives subtle movement of that flare coming across. And I really think that's the tasteful way to do a flare. You know, it's kind of an afterthought. It's not your centerpiece. And that's pretty much it. It's very basic, but it's shiny and it's eye-catching, and every little piece of it is moving. And I'll go ahead and do a RAM preview here, and we'll see how it looks. There we go. You got motion blur, you got everything moving, keeping it interesting. You can see all the reflections, the specular. Notice that specular on the top of it is moving across a little bit. Might be kind of hard to see in this preview. Maybe move it up to full screen. That subtle specular movement going on there. It's kind of jaggedy looking because I'm not at 100% right here. But that's basically it. So I hope you found this helpful, and you can start making some really, really glossy, shiny, interesting looking logos. And don't forget to check out our Facebook page of Brograph and tell us what you think, and you know, maybe you like us on there. Maybe we'll start putting some updates on there, and you can follow us. And then also, if you're interested in looking at more tutorials like these on Brograph, go to Brograph.com, and you'll see a whole catalog there of all the tutorials we've done. Until next time, I'm Dave Koss. See you later, bros.